What's up, metal and heavy music fans? It's FlightOfIcarus again with MetalTrenches.com, and it's time to talk about the new album from melodic death metal band the Black Dahlia Murder, Verminous, via Metal Blade Records. And rather than just doing an album review, I thought it would be kind of fun, since I've been following this band since pretty much the very beginning, to do a full tier list and kind of talk about it within context of moving through all these other albums. But before I do that, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to the channel. Stick around afterwards too, because there's plenty more videos like this one to enjoy. So jumping right into it, we're going to have to start all the way back in 2003 with the classic Unhallowed. This is a fantastic album, and I'm just going to say it right now. For me, it's still S tier. Even after all these years, this was the first album I ever heard from the Black Dahlia Murder, and I kind of love the story behind it, how they got signed so quickly to Metal Blade Records and kicked off a lifelong career with them, signing that same year. You've got awesome songs on here like Funeral Thirst, Elder Misanthropy, Closed Casket Requiem. So many catchy guitar riffs just cemented in my head from this one, from just listening to it for so long. I probably worn this darn thing out, and this is back from the days when I was still listening to physical media in addition to just collecting it. So it's just kind of cool to have that history behind it. It was definitely kind of a transitional record for me too, because it had riffs that were like appealing enough for like metalcore kids like me, but also getting me more into kind of classic death metal aesthetic as well. I agree with Trevor too, that this really is still one of the best despite some of its rougher elements, and he actually still lists it as his favorite album to this day as well. But let's move along to 2005 with Miasma, or I've heard some people pronounce it Miasma. I'm pretty sure the proper pronunciation is Miasma. I'm going to put this one as an A, and this is a top choice for many people. I know plenty of people out there who would have ranked this as S tier. It actually took me a long time to get into it, and I had many arguments over the years with people when I still actually disliked this album. Something about the album art and the songwriting and the production, it definitely was a left turn from Unhallowed, and loving that album so much, I really kind of went into this hoping just to get more Unhallowed, and that's definitely not what this is. But still, great classic songs on here: Statutory Ape, Flies, I'm Charming, A Vulgar Picture. And to defend my previous criticisms of the album, this is actually Trevor's least favorite, as per his ranking that he did for Kerrang. So if you got the singer saying it's their least favorite album, there's something to be said there. Just to be fair, the term he used for it was, it feels kind of plasticky. And I definitely get that. That was sort of my first impression of it as well. But again, it has grown for me, and I think it has enough legacy and enough consistency to deserve being an A tier. Move into 2007 with Nocturnal. This is another fan favorite, obviously. I'm going to put it at A tier, not quite at S tier. I know, again, this is another album where a lot of people would put it as S tier. This is a popular choice. It really cemented their status with both great playing and also a sense of humor. I'm remembering when the music video came out for... And I think this was kind of the point that they just kind of took over. Like, the Black Dahlia at this point was sort of a thing. And it wasn't just that fluke band that, just put out 2 albums that were pretty solid. Like, this is the beginning of their legacy, as far as I'm concerned. Other great tracks too, like Nocturnal, Death Mask Divine. Just an all-around excellent record. Just not my first pick when I reach for a Black Dahlia Murder album and it's the first thing I want. It's in my top 5, but it's not quite in my top 3, which we're going to get to. But I'm going to segue now to 2009 with Deflorate. For this one, it's a B for me. I know a lot of people who would rank this as lower. I just feel like in general, this is kind of a lesser talked about album. But no less quality, really. It's pretty darn consistent. Plenty of classics on here. You got Necropolis, Denounced, Disgraced, Death Panorama. This was the first album with Ryan Knight on guitar too, so definitely notable there. I really enjoy this weird album art. I know that Trevor's got some opinions on it, but I love that it has kind of this like 90s thrash vibe to it. Very old school looking. It's by Tony Cole. Very consistent album, just maybe not super memorable. Like, it's not one that just sticks out, and I'm not entirely sure why. The way Trevor put it was he feels like with this album they were starting to get too technical and kind of at the sacrifice of solid dynamics. So they wanted to sort of regroup at that point, which leads nicely to 2011's Ritual, which for my money is perhaps their best album. It's my favorite album from them. Just and it makes sense too. Like, this was kind of a reaction, he said, to Deflorate. They wanted to kind of slow things down, give it more of a ebb and flow, add to those dynamics, and what came out of it is just an amazing feat, in my opinion. From the highly aesthetically pleasing album art to the amazing track listing, just there's so much to love about this album, and really nothing to not like. You've got A Shrine to Madness, Moonlight Equilibrium, Conspiring with the Damned, and The Window, just to name a few. Just a really striking and absolutely ripping album from start to finish, with lots of great vocals here too, some variation, lyrics around mysticism and magic. Trevor calls it their most focused Black Dahlia strike of all time, and I definitely agree with that. But moving along even further, 2013, we've got Everblack, and for me, this is where my interest started to wane for a little bit. I know some people really like this album. Trevor really loves this album. Personally, I think it's just kind of C territory. It's okay. It wasn't an album that just reached out and grabbed me right away. It was another one that I really had to kind of work at to enjoy. It just didn't click with me initially, but did end up being kind of a grower. Favorite tracks on here: In Hell Is Where She Waits For Me, Into the Everblack, Raped in Hatred by Vines of Thorn, and Phantom Limb Masturbation, which is just, I always think that's one of their best album titles ever. The art and the title were actually an artistic rebuttal to the speculation that the band had changed direction as a result of participating in Warped Tour. And so, yeah, they were just kind of trying to make a statement that, no, we're still hard, we're still death metal, we're still dark. We're not turning into some, like, poppy band. And ultimately, it's a perfectly fine album, just not one that, again, like, kind of grabs me outright or really, like, sticks with me. And so it's just, it's average. It's average territory. And then that moved into 2015's Abysmal, which kind of continued that trend. I even considered putting this at a D, but I just don't feel like they've really put an album that's, like, below average. I still feel like this is pretty average territory stuff. It seems to be relatively common that the consensus at this point is that this was one of their weaker albums, if not the weakest album they've put out. Just kind of bland, not bad, but just not a lot of standouts either. I would be really interested to hear the original raw mix that Trevor wanted, but I guess the label ultimately turned it down and wouldn't approve it, and so they went for the more kind of modern sheen as usual. And it's also kind of a shame, too, because I really love the cover art of this album and expected it to be this just totally brutal thing, and it just kind of came in with a whimper instead. It was also the last album with Ryan Knight, but ultimately it does have some moments. Receipt is good, Threat Level number 3, and Vlad, Son of the Dragon, is probably my personal favorite on here. I really love that brief gang vocal moment kind of towards the beginning of the song. It always kind of gets me hyped up, and I'm just a sucker for stuff like that.
Raise up the traitors, by order of it, it's not the Everblack. Feeling the socialistic, supposed because my message is.
And then we got 2017 with Nightbringers, and I feel like this is where they really redeemed themselves and came back around and proved to me that they were not done yet, and it was worth me continuing to pay attention. S tier album. If you ask me, one of their top 3 albums for sure. It's also probably their heaviest album, I think. It just grabs you by the throat and never lets go. And so many amazing songs. Widowmaker, Matriarch, Nightbringers, Jars, Catacomb, Hecatomb. Really every song on this is kind of single worthy. May ultimately even supplant Ritual, honestly, in the long term, as far as my favorite album goes. They're sort of kind of battling it out right now. This was also their best-selling direct-to-consumer pre-order in Metal Blades Records history, so props to them for that. And for the record, too, this is Trevor's second favorite album of their discography so far, and rightly so. And that finally brings us to 2020 with Verminous, their latest album. And I gotta say, leading up to this, I wasn't particularly impressed by the lead singles. Those songs actually ended up being my least favorites on the album. They're fine songs. They just come off as a little generic to me, kind of a been there, done that, especially after just how impactful Nightbringers was. I think I just expected more. They have kind of grown on me over time listening to this album over and over again. But honestly, I'm much more enjoying the deeper cuts like Godlessly, which has this breakneck pace and great variation in the vocals. Also, removal of the Oaken Stake, which is this triplet-filled kind of skeleton witchy romp with soaring, deathclocky harmonized solos at the end. And also Sunless Empire, which in addition to just being an all-around great track, may have one of their best solos to date. These are the songs that really got me moving from first listen. Doesn't quite have that same initial punch that Nightbringers did again, but it balances that out by being pretty damn consistent in quality. Even some of the tracks that may not be in my top picks, like the Leather Apron Scorn, are fun to listen to and have some standout elements, like it's really sick, decrepit bass line. I love the clanky tone on that. And it just ultimately feels like an album that may not be quite as remembered, perhaps kind of on par with Deflorate and Everblack on some level, but a little bit better than that. So ultimately, I'm giving it B tier. If I'm giving it my usual scoring, I'd say it's about a 9 for enjoyability, pretty darn consistent, not quite as top tier as these. Musicianship is also solid, it's about a 9. And then as far as innovation goes, it's like a 7. So kind of rounding out to definitely B territory. And yeah, it's a solid album. Just not quite as good as my top albums. It's not ending up in the pantheon anytime soon, but you know, it's still early. Time will tell. Maybe as I continue to listen to it, it'll crank itself up there. It'll end up being a big time grower. But yeah, those are my thoughts on Verminous and also the Black Dahlia Murder discography. I'll obviously, I'm a longtime fan. I got them on my vest here. FlightOfIcarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.